G'day and welcome to the Grow a Small Business Podcast. I'm your host, Troy Trewin. Each week, we speak with an owner who has grown a business with 5 to 30 team members to something bigger. Diving into their numbers and unearthing the pain they've experienced, we explore what they did to overcome each barrier and what they would do differently from day one. Let's get into it.
Welcome, everyone. Today I'm interviewing Nima Gardideh from Pearmill, based in Brooklyn, New York, United States. Thanks for your time today, Nima.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Let's start with how we know each other. Marcus from Legendary Podcast put us in touch a few months ago. Thought you'd be a great guest for us.
Yeah, thanks, Marcus.
Tell our audience a bit about your business, what it does and how it makes money.
Yeah, Pearmill is a performance marketing agency. We help primarily venture-backed businesses and challenger brands scale their advertising efforts on paid search and paid social. Performance marketing effectively means that we care about the return on the ad spend. So if we're spending $1, we would like it to be returned with hopefully many times over. And our work spans media buying, creative production, conversion rate optimization, all the way to what we call attribution modeling, where we try to model out the spend and understand the returns over time for the brands that we work with. We've been in, I call it sort of like marketplace, SaaS, and healthcare sectors historically. Those are sort of areas we do very well in, as well as some, the DTC e-commerce world. And the company is about 4 years old. We started at end of 2019. That's sort of what we do.
And the cost, paid ads, especially I think in 2023, really started to creep up. Is that something that, you guys have really noticed in the last couple of years?
Yeah, so I think that overall competition increases over time, but at the same time, you will end up as a brand finding new ways to speak to your customers and to your target audience. And so the problem is really, can you, at the same rate as the prices are getting high, can you at least improve by the same rate, if not over that, right? And so what ends up happening is that some subset of brands are able to do that and they're able to scale, and some can't. But both Meta and Google, and really any of these paid social, paid search channels where you're spending money to get impressions or clicks, they actually have, in the millions of numbers of businesses they're working with. They're not working with a couple thousand businesses that are spending a lot of money, which really means that their main customer is the small business.
Yeah.
And so because of that, they have these bidding structures that's called, usually, I think now internally, I know Meta calls it the discounted pacing algorithms, where they try to give you the cheapest, most valuable clicks as they can give you. And so the problem is almost never, can I get customers on these platforms? It's, can I get customers at a certain scale? Because if you're spending $100 a day, let's say, you probably are able to get the right unit economics out of that. But the question is, can you spend $1,000 a day or $10,000 a day? And those are harder to figure out. And you have to really expand the way you do marketing and so on. And so I think there's still really good channels for acquiring customers, but scale has become harder as, generally the competition's increased. And the costs go up because competition increases. That's really all there is, because these bidding algorithms are putting advertisers against each other and figuring out who's willing to pay more. So, I still think they're good channels, but it's hard. It's getting harder.
Yep.
Just as it is. Yeah.
So even more reason for a service that Pearmill provides to get better return out of your ad spend. I mean, in the digital age now, there's so much data and tracking. We can actually see what's working and what's not working, which is fantastic. We wrote a marketing funding flywheel ebook about this. 3 principles in marketing. The third one there is the LTV to CAC ratio, lifetime value to customer acquisition cost, 3 to 1. And with digital marketing, it just plays into that, being able to track the data and keep within that ratio. And once you nail it, it's just a money printing machine. You just tip more in. But obviously, you need experts like yourselves to be able to find the best ways to invest that money. And CRO, or conversion rate optimization, is, I think, underinvested in. A lot of businesses don't even think about that, whereas that can really boost your return on your ad spend.
Yeah, there's like I think I'm in the sort of, like, I call it startup land. That's where my career sort of started in. And, this play with the right amount of money to spend and get it back in the right time frame has always been a big part of how these companies, especially these startups, grow quickly. But over the past couple of years, there's gonna a shift to faster profitability, let's call it. And so that sort of threshold that marketers were maybe comfortable with before has changed. Let's say historically, let's say in the 2010s all the way to 2020, 21, marketers that had a lot of funding or venture capital to use were probably comfortable with like a 6 to 12 month return on ad spend time frame. So the CAC LTV being on the 50% in the first year front. I think that's changing now. People are not as comfortable as they were used to on that, and because the capital markets have dried up a bit. So I think you want to be probably breaking even within the 3 to 6 month frame. Ideally on the first purchase if you're e-commerce, but if you have some sort of a subscription or long-term usage of your product, 3 to 6 months seems reasonable. And so we've tried to change a lot in how we think about it in order to match that pacing. But overall, that formula, understanding it, is like an extremely important part of the craft, figuring out how to invest in that way.
And how did you start out?
Yeah, so let's go back in time. So I started as a computer scientist in college, and actually dropped out after 2 years of being in University of Toronto in Canada to start my first company, which was sort of this meal planner. Eventually became this recipe site, and we used some venture money actually to build that company. But unfortunately, we failed, and so I started working for a couple of different companies as like a 20-year-old who had decided to drop out of college. And I did some product management, I did some marketing for an e-commerce company first called Frank and Oak, and later on I became like a head of product of a SaaS company called Tapalytics that was in the A/B testing space. And so what ended up becoming interesting to me was just growing companies was quite interesting. But at that point, I started another company with a friend of mine. Again, we went through Y Combinator with it. We were YC fellows and tried to create this like consumer reports of the future. This is before LLMs and chatbots, but it was this chatbot you could text back and forth and ask for product recommendations. But it was mostly powered by humans. Like humans were responding to the questions. We did that for a couple of years, and what happened is basically we were just couldn't figure out the business model. The unit economics just didn't make sense for that type of service. And I put my rent on my credit card, and I was like, we got to make money basically next month because I'm going to run out of money now. And so me and my co-founder at the time, there was just two of us then, just decided doing any form of consulting. We emailed a bunch of our friends and folks that we'd worked with in the past and said, hey, like, if you need help, I can help. And I did some engineering work, I did some product work, and then my co-founder Kareem did some marketing work. And it was advertising on paid search, I think Google ads. And he did it for 1 month, and then the next month he did it again because the companies keep running ads and they want to keep getting customers. And I was like, this is great. We can keep making money every month if we keep doing this. So this was around 2018 or so. And by the end of 2019, we had done it enough that we'd gotten good at it, but we knew we were missing a piece, which was creative production on Meta, and TikTok wasn't out yet, but Meta was very important back then. So we added a third co-founder. It was one of my friends, Mary, who had done this work before and decided to make a company out of it. It went from consulting with companies to, can we build an agency that's powered by software that's sort of thinking about the work as a holistic approach of multiple disciplines coming together. We're probably one of the earlier, what's now called like full service agencies. We're doing end-to-end work from the beginning across all of these 4 different disciplines. That's by 2019 we decided to do it, and this is the fourth, fifth year that we've been in business, and there's about 35 of us working on this. Yeah.
And how old were you 5 years ago when you started the business up?
Back then I was 27. Yeah.
And were you both full time when you started the business, and to now 35 FTE? And was it 2 of you effectively from the start?
Yeah, there was two of us, and then 3 of us full time by end of 2019, effectively, and then by 2020 we had started hiring other full time employees. But in the first 6 months or so, it was really just the 3 of us full time, and we weren't really making enough money to live from it. But it's just what we did. I remember one of my co-founders had this a special recipe. He called it poor man's pasta. Yeah. Where it was just pasta and salt, and that's all he was eating for a while. So, in the first few months, we really had nothing else to do but work. And then COVID hit, which in a way was weirdly helpful to us because there's nothing else to do out in the outside world. So all we could do is focus on work, and
there was a massive increase in online shopping. Yeah.
Huge boost, and there was a friend of mine ran this company, or he still runs it, called Sonder, and I remember I was staying with him in San Francisco for a week as the COVID lockdown started to sort of come in. And if you don't know about Sonder is a distributed hotel. So as this was happening, he was showing me his revenue drop every day. All the existing bookings were going away. And their path to revenue previously was through what's called the OTA, so the online travel agencies. Like think of Booking.com, Airbnb, and all these different players that effectively route traffic to hotels and get bookings for them. Those paths were drying up, and they need to go direct to consumer. And so really our big break was me being in the right room at the right time, where my friend was like, "Can you help us try to go direct to consumer?" And I remember being in San Francisco on a Saturday, messaging my co-founder saying, like, we're going to do this starting Monday. And I flew on Sunday back to New York, and we started working on it. It was, I think, one of the last flights out of SFO and shut down for a couple of weeks after that. But that's sort of our big first entrance to, playing in the high scale of ad spend, and I'm quite grateful for that friendship and that relationship, and we did extremely well. They were able to go back up to 85% occupancy within just a few weeks of working with us, and the company is now public. At the time they could have died.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it was a crazy time for everyone. Yeah.
And do you have any other key numbers you can share to illustrate the growth of the business?
Yeah, so we were just the 3 of us in 2019. We ended up being around 9 by end of 2020. We were around 20 people by end of 2021. And 2022, we went all the way to about 32. And this last year, we got to 35. And generally speaking, we basically grown the first couple of years to 3x a year, and then 20% year over year. Although last year was our first year where we had less than 20% growth. Just because the markets have shifted a lot. And we think this year is going to go back to normal.
Well, that's phenomenal growth, Nima, over 5 years, going from 3 to 35 team members, and even 20% growth, is great. Well done to you and your co-founders.
Yeah, it's been a journey.
Yeah. When was the moment you felt like you had succeeded?
I'll let you know when it happens. Yeah. It's an interesting journey being an entrepreneur, because there's moments where you feel like everything's working, and there's moments where you feel like you have no control over what's happening. And I think there was a point in 2021 where it felt like that nothing was going to stop us. And our team is really global, and so the past couple of years with the different wars that have started around the world, they've actually affected us dramatically, either emotionally physically or financially or all the above. And we have or had folks in Ukraine, in Russia, in Israel, and different parts of our team have been affected. One of my co-founders is Ukrainian. She was born and raised there and lives in New York. And so it felt like at different times we were really fighting some war and trying to do our best to keep everyone safe. And so as founders of companies that work with folks in these regions, it's been really, really eye-opening, and also just changed my life for sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse, on how it's been like to be in this market. But I think we've gotten to a point where I'm pretty proud of the types of relationships we've built with our team members, and their focus on trying to become the best at what they do. And this past year was our first sort of like year we start tracking this metric, and which is sort of net revenue retention. As we in the agency world, the biggest problem is you lose clients all the time. It's just how it works. People are either changing their strategy, has nothing to do with you, or the market dynamics shift, or personalities clash, which is like a thing that happens in the services world. And so our retention rate has gone up dramatically. I think it was something around 20% the first year, and it was 30 or 40% the second year. Now we're in the close to 70% retention, which is sort of unheard of in the services world. We spent all of last year focusing on it and trying to be better at it, and I feel pretty proud of that. I think that's really what feels like success to me, is like we're doing really good work and people want to keep working with us on it. And we know we're a crafts business. We're trying to be the best at what we do. And so whenever we're able to crack new things and increase our learning rate, that always feels good.
So is that net revenue retention rate, is that what success looks like to you, or are there other factors?
I think there is that's the sort of like health of the business success. Like if we don't have that, we're not going to be able to build a strong business on top of the work we do. But for agencies, the biggest problem that sort of erodes them over time is culture. And because there's moments where this actually, like, the revenue problem becomes large enough that you end up exerting too much stress on the people, which effectively runs them out of the company, and then you have to have a high churn rate. We've been pretty proud of maintaining it below 3% over the years, and so my hope is that we continue doing that. And I think it's one of those things that I think the success will only be noticeable looking back at it in like 10 years from now.
Yeah.
Because right now it looks good, but we could totally mess it up.
Yeah, that churn rate on team members, the hidden costs there, studies show it's anywhere between 1 and 27 times the role's annual salary is the hidden cost of either mishiring or fucking up the culture, putting too much pressure on the team, and people start leaving. And it's a really fine balance, particularly in agency businesses. So it's good that you guys are aware of it and are doing something about it. Perfect question for you. Number one thing you'd recommend to marketing a fast-growing business?
Number one thing. I think the biggest thing, and this is just sort of like our belief system as a marketing agency, is that process is probably the most important aspect of marketing. Going through the right series of steps in order to learn from the work that you do and learn from the audience that you're going after, in order to figure out how to speak to them and how to speak to the product you're selling and how to get them to understand why it's valuable in their lives, is probably the most important thing. The process we use, we call the sprint process, where we're trying to every month clearly define the initiatives we're trying to go after and tests that we want to run, how we would judge the test, if it was winning or not. And by the end of the month, we usually have data to back those ideas and hypotheses, and then use that for the next iteration. And so this sort of like loop of learning is what powers the work that we do. I've met plenty of marketers that don't have a process like this, and it's successful, but it's not a repeatable success most of the time. It's sort of like their intuition worked at the right time, and the company was able to scale. If you're a marketer, you want to sort of own and increase the learning or the output of your craft, this is sort of what I would recommend. It's trying to become process driven. I'd say the same thing to an entrepreneur, by the way, right? I do the same thing about running a business, just run through the process, try to become better every day, and compound the learnings.
Apart from salty pasta, how did you fund the business?
We didn't really. So one of the great things about services businesses is that it's you're making money from day one. So the way really we funded it was to not have very expensive lives. In the beginning, we're making very little money from clients was enough for us to continue working on it. And the other part in the beginning of an agency you have is this a capacity problem where you don't have more capacity to work. And you need other people to be in the company with you, but you can't afford them. And so what we ended up doing for that problem basically was to just not sleep for a while and power through it until we were able to sort of like accept a new client, just power through the work and do the work until we were able to hire people. So plenty of times throughout the first year, multiple of us had 2 jobs at the same time. I remember I was our first CRO person, for instance. I would do my work until 6 p.m. and then I would go eat and move my body a little bit, and I'd start my second job as our CRO expert and build landing pages and do all of that. And just enough that eventually we're able to hire someone to fully take on that part of the company, and now that person actually has a whole team around them. And so that you're selling your time ultimately in a services business. So that's sort of one of the problems. And then the second thing is that we just moved away from selling our time eventually and figured out a business model and a pricing model that had more leverage than the number of hours we're spending on the work. And I highly recommend that generally you want to be valuing yourself not on time, but the value you bring to the businesses that you're working with. So we usually price that way now, and that helps a lot create the leverage you need to get out of the work.
Totally agree. So you haven't had investors come into the business apart from the 3 of you?
No, technically this is the same company, it's the same corporation of that second startup that I talked about, and it has something like a couple of $100,000 of investment on the cap table. But those investors, they're quite still very friendly with us, but don't really expect returns, even though now we can definitely return their capital and then some, and maybe someday we will. But we had run out of that money long before we started this version of the company.
Yep. If you were to start up today with plenty of funding, would you go into your industry?
No, I wouldn't. I think generally speaking, marketing technology is not a great area for venture-backed businesses. So it does depend on the timeline and the multiple you have to return on the money. But if you let's say had your own money and you want to invest it, this is a pretty great space to be in because you're usually faster revenue. It's very results driven, so it's quite meritocratic. So long as you're able to show that you're able to bring more revenue or new customers to companies, people are willing to pay for it. But it doesn't have I don't want to use the word monopolistic, but it doesn't seem to be a very concentrated industry in that there are a lot of different tools because they're quite easy to build. There's not a lot of moats. And so if you're building a business here in the space, you want to be maybe private equity backed or using your own capital or using sort of angel funding to work on it. Otherwise, if you can bootstrap, even better. One of the best businesses in this space in the marketing tech world is called Klaviyo, and they just went public a couple of months ago. Fully bootstrap business, doing I think a couple $1 billion a year now. But that's sort of the biggest business you can build in the space. Sorry, $2 billion in market cap. I don't think they're the billions in revenue.
No, they're like a CRM. They're very big on Shopify, aren't they? Mm.
That's right. Like 70% of their customers are Shopify users. And so that's sort of the biggest version of a tech product you can build in the pure marketing world. If you go a little bit past marketing into product, you can be like an Amplitude or a Mixpanel. But even those markets, like there's really one player that's able to go public so far, and their multiples don't look that great. Yeah.
Can you outline the most stressful point in your small business growth journey so our audience can learn from it?
Oh man, the most stressful is really when you don't have much control over your revenue and you're paying all these folks and you feel responsible for their well-being. And I think that I've built like a stronger system around keeping my mental state in order to be able to perform in those rough times. But that's sort of the worst it can get. And it really depends on your personality. Mine is that I care a lot about the people that we're working with. And so if I'm not performing well and bringing a new business, let's say, into the company, then I'm sort of failing them. And I may have to let go of them or restructure the company. And so those are the most stressful times in my experience. It's that, and then the relationships I have with my co-founders and my team that tend to be the hardest when these times are happening, when the sort of most acute versions of the challenges are in front of you and you're facing them. Yeah, those are the toughest points.
What area in business do you feel you've had to work on the most to add the greatest value?
I'd say I'm just learning this, so I don't think I have like figured it out, but it's looking like it's going to be the biggest lever. Is just understanding your value proposition well enough that even if you're in a market that's highly competitive, you can create differentiation, so that you can go on a sales call or you're marketing yourself. It's very clear why people should be using it. It's funny, obviously we do this for our brands all the time, but for ourselves, we've not done as much work on marketing ourselves, and we're doing it for the first time this year. And it's just changing the way I've done the work, and I think it's going to be great.
Have you read either of April Dunford's books? Obviously Awesome and Sales Pitch.
Yeah, both of them. And I know April. Yeah, she's wonderful. I've like read them and even like talked to clients about her work. But it's interesting to doing it to your own business. It took us a while to decide to do it. And I think the thing that changed this time, because we've done it in the sense that like we think about our positioning and branding, but never ran a process strongly enough to really dig in, because it's not easy to figure it out. And I think I've pretty historically used my intuition, where now we're using both competitive data and talking to a lot of our customers and clients that we've had in the past to try to understand what makes us really good at what we do, and then how we can position ourselves for the next stage of the company. And so I think the process that we're running through now is looking a lot more rigorous. And historically, it was just sort of like, here's my intuition about how we're going to fit in the market. Let's use that. And that's not been maybe the highest outcome version of it.
Yeah, I've recently finished both of April's books. So for the audience, the obviously Awesome book is about positioning, and the Sales Pitch book's obviously about crafting a great sales pitch, and both amazing resources. I'd highly recommend going through them. And April she claims to be the world expert in B2B positioning. Sorry, in positioning for B2B tech companies. So pertinent for you guys. And yeah, just love her approach and the way she breaks it down. A very complex topic, obviously positioning particularly, but also the sales pitch as well. What have you enjoyed the least about managing fast growth?
Oh man, I think that people talk about growing pains. And I used to, when I was like a younger entrepreneur, thinking those are like, champagne problems. Like that sounds great. It would be lovely to have growing pains. But growing pains are rough because, basically you have people who are at their max capacity every day, and they don't have space or time to figure out how to delegate more or hire people to help them out and so on. So you can get to these states where you're stuck. And so that was the hardest thing to go through. And I still think it would be hard again if we had to double the company again year over year in terms of headcount. It felt like after the first year we did it, the second year it was much easier to double. I know companies and founders who've gone over the 2x mark. I think there is something magical about 2x. You seem to be able to do it pretty easily. If you have to go over the 2x in terms of headcount increase, it feels much, much harder to do. I mean, I've not done it other than the first year, but I don't recommend it to anybody. If you can build a business doubling every year, do that. That sounds great. It's still going to be hard, by the way. It just seems manageable after you do it a couple of times. That was the hardest part.
What do you love most about growing a small business?
I think it's just the people. You end up meeting all sorts of people, working with amazing folks, and we're a remote company. And so we've met folks from all around the world, and we work with people from all around the world. And we're big fans of quirky personalities and bringing people together from different cultures. I think that's been the most special part of the experience. And, being able to create a culture where people thrive. I feel grateful to even be able to witness this, let alone be a part of it. So I think that's the part that stands out the most.
What has been the biggest mindset shift for you in your small business growth journey?
Oh man, the mindset shifts come every year. They don't seem to stop, but I think that the one that has been is one that I think I need to learn more about and go deeper in is just my ability to be not only transparent with people I'm working with, but also be vulnerable enough that I'm able to speak my fears. And so then we can work on them together, because usually my fears are attached to the business. And as a founder, I highly identify with the business itself as sort of an extension of myself, and so do my co-founders. And so when the business is in pain, I feel pain and I feel anxiety. And so being able to manage that together as a group of founders and executives, I think it tends to be hard. And having the right language, the right mental models, but really being able to be vulnerable about what's going on, I think is the biggest shift I've had to make. And I'm just an extreme optimist, but really optimism sometimes is a mask of your actual anxiety. And so it's very important to expose that part of yourself when you're trying to solve these problems.
The number one habit you think a small business owner needs to develop and maintain?
Yeah, for me, it's a rhythm, really. And by that I mean in almost like every aspect of the word. You want to create momentum in different parts of the organization as well as your life. So I tend to want to have some sort of a rhythm every day, where I can sort of trust that everything around me is taken care of, so that I can put my heart and soul and intellect in solving the problems of the business. And so that really goes from I meditate in the mornings, usually wake up at the exact same time. I'm climbing 3 times a week and do cycling 3 times a week, all the way to I check my ClickUp board, which is our task manager, exactly as when I arrive in the office, and close it up at the end of the day. And I even have a spreadsheet tracking how good I am at checking my ClickUp in the morning and so on. So I'm a big fan of rituals. I'm a big fan of rhythm. And I think it creates momentum, not just for yourself, but for everyone around you. And so if you can be the one that creates this like feedback loop of momentum for everyone will start sort of mirroring it, and create the same sort of outcome that you're looking for. And so that's sort of like my version of it. I know entrepreneurs who would disagree with me. So if I were to sort of abstract that as just figure out what you're really good at and use that to empower people and bring the best out of them.
Are you struggling to find time to work on your business? Or is your health and relationships out of balance? Lost confidence, or are your weeks filled with fear? Our free 10-day Transform Your Performance online course shows you how to unlock at least 5 hours a week. We start with the secret to guaranteed success, and with over 100 lessons and free tools, you will become more focused, productive, and feel more in control of your business, health, and relationships. RollSmallBusiness.com.
Now you've gone from 3 founders to 35 team members in 5 years, phenomenal growth. Can you talk to how you've added people to the team, some wins, mistakes, and advice for those listening?
Yeah, I think wins is like, we've gotten lucky most of the time, which is really good. But we found people wherever they are, which has been a huge advantage. We're always remote, so it was an easy choice for us to start remote and stay remote even after the pandemic. And so we found amazing people across the world. Some of our executives and partners in the business are in like Eastern Europe, all the way to like South America. And because we didn't have this sort of location as a filter, that was a huge gift to find the best people that we possibly can. And the second part is just be very clear about the culture that you want to create and filter for it as much as possible. And really filtering for it's quite simple because after you have add a couple people to the team who represent the culture you want, you can be adding more of those people that will be the filters for the culture. So as you scale up, trust people to maintain the culture. And I talk about it a lot in this way with people so they know they are just as big of a filter for the culture as we are as founders of the business. Yeah, and in terms of failures, I think, I'm a big fan of trusting first and then losing trust later on, and that's bitten me in the butt a couple of times in the past. So it's not for everyone. There's another model that I like now more called the trust battery model by Toby from Shopify, was the founder of Shopify. He talks about that everyone you start working with should start at like a 50% trust battery. And depending on their actions, they can increase or decrease their trust battery with you. And so you want to basically start somewhere in the middle as opposed to all the way at the max or all the way at the bottom. But historically, I've started sort of all the way at the max. And what ends up happening is that usually makes it such that I'm making the harder decisions of replacing them much later than really I should have. And those are the learnings the first couple of years.
What are some of the things you recommend to building a sustainable and kick-ass culture to help with growth, especially because you've always been remote? That must be extra challenging.
Yeah, so I think for us, like it's actually very rare for agencies to do this, but we did this sort of like mission and values process for this company where we try to be clear about what type of culture we want internally, and we speak about that externally as well. So when we're working to recruit folks, we're sharing that with them. Creating rhythm is an important one. Up until actually this month, this is the first month I'm not doing this, but for the first 4 years of the business, I wrote an email to everyone every week about what's going on in the business and what we're doing. I found that it's not as useful now that the team is large enough that they're doing their own sort of rhythm building. But building rhythm is really important. Building sort of cadence is really important. And so I did it through that email. At some point, it was a podcast for a while, where I was even recording myself. I have less time on my hands now, but at the time I had a lot more time. So I was like recording myself, reading it out loud, and people were like listening to it as a podcast in the mornings. And so that's really important. And the other thing is just building community. And so what we end up doing right now is we bring everyone together at least once a year, where people meet in person and are able to sort of go beyond seeing each other on Zoom. A lot of them have created friendships over the years and fly to see each other as well, which is lovely to see. I think that is a hugely important part of it. But remote is really about cadence building and community building. So there's different tools we've used in the past. Some are still working. Some we've had to shut down and start from scratch. And we're always experimenting on that because I think that's how you maintain it.
Tell our audience how you've handled balance.
Yeah, I think I'm a big fan of the sort of work harmony model. I like working a lot, and so I never want to feel guilty about doing it. And so the way I think about it is sort of like energy management, and as opposed to everything else. And so if I'm feeling low energy on a certain set of tasks or a couple of days in a row, I try to sort of be introspective of what's happening, as opposed to think that, oh, I've been overworking and so on. Especially as a founder, like my job is to run this marathon. And so I have to think about how do I manage my energy. And so there's been different solutions to that for me over time, but the obvious things that work are taking care of your mental state and your physical state. I do therapy once a week. I've like experimented with things like psychedelics a lot to think about how I feel in my body and how my mind works. And otherwise, I think the aspect of agencies that we talked about is that there's like a pressure to run you out of time for less money. And so the other part is just, can you create a system that is not happening? And I think sometimes that's a struggle, especially this last year was harder for us because the market was sort of crashing on us. But the pricing models matter a lot. How you structure the business matters a lot. So outside of my personal sort of energy management, I think what my role is with work-life balance is creating the right incentives for us to work with our clients in a way that make sure that we're able to produce great work without feeling like we have to overexert ourselves. And so we have a very open dialogue about that with our executives, and we talk about that on a per client basis, and then raise the flag to the client saying, hey, you are exerting us more than we are comfortable with. And actually this past month, I've had 2 of those conversations. And it turns out people are pretty open to it. They're like, oh yeah, well, we don't want to burn you out, because they want to continue working with you because you're driving them results. So being very open about it is actually a huge advantage. And I think people don't speak to it enough because people are scared. They come from a place of fear that, oh, what if we lose this revenue or lose this client? But would you rather lose the client or burn out your people? I think I'd far rather lose the client. And so that's been sort of the viewpoint from the beginning for us.
How much professional development have you invested in yourself?
Probably a lot. I'm a big reader of management books. I have a management book club that I meet with every couple of weeks. We've had a coach for a couple of years. I still think therapy is professional development just because it makes me a better person. I'm listening to probably like 4 or 5 hours of content a week on not just business, but the world, economics, science. Those are sort of the things that sort of tickle my mind enough where I end up applying seemingly unrelated concepts to the work I'm doing, from evolutionary biology to physics to economics. I think that a lot of those concepts tend to be helpful in the way I think about the world and think about how I interact with humans. And so I do a lot of that. What I'm trying to do more of is things that are completely unrelated. So I picked up producing music for the past couple of years, for instance, where it's like opened me up emotionally as a human way more than before, and it's helped me build better relationships. And so I still consider that professional development, even though it was for fun at first. I'm like, oh my God, it's changed me so much.
You mentioned you've had a coach. Have you had mentors along the way?
At different points, yes, especially for the crafts that I've tried to master. I'm a big fan of the coach/mentor relationship. I think they can go a long way, especially when you're trying to master any craft. Like if you picked up an instrument or tried to be really good at a sport, for whatever reason, it's there's less stigma around doing that in those spaces where for work people are doing it less. But I just had a few folks that I looked up to very early on in my career, and then built decent relationships with them for different aspects of the work I'm doing. And the other aspect of this is community. I think I have a strong community of founders that I tend to tap into. And so another form of it is sort of like intelligence from the community. And that's where I've done a lot more the last few years. I think a lot of my learnings or support has come less from like an individual and more from a community of people whom I've like trusted with the problems we're dealing with at the business, and they tend to be extremely helpful.
Do you have a board of directors or advisors?
We don't, although we may be creating a board this year for the first time. But I think I probably have like a contrarian view on this. I don't think they're useful. They tend to not have enough information about the business or the people in it to be really helpful, other than passing you mental models. And so if you're really paying for mental models, then you can not pay for it and get it for free from other people. And so the only reason you'd want a board of directors is to be able to manage the business without being as involved in it. And so for us, we're trying to learn how to do that in order to figure out if we want to do that. And so we're trying to form it just to learn at this point in time in our careers of like, oh, it would be interesting to learn how to run a business from a board. And so that's sort of like where the next stage of our careers are going to be in the next few years is passing off this business to a team that runs it. But I think it's going to take a long time. And first step is learning how to do it from another vantage point. So, yeah.
Now, you've exited a business, didn't exit the way you wanted it to, but any advice for those thinking of exiting one day?
Oh man, yeah, I think the only versions for me are just like sort of failing out of these businesses. So, but I have plenty of friends who've exited businesses, and the main thing they say is that it's going to be stressful, it's going to suck until it's done, and it's not done until the money's in the bank. I have a few. I'm an investor in a bunch of companies, and a few of them have gone through this process recently, and it's sort of crazy how like multi-million-dollar deals, like multi in the tens or hundreds, will be almost like signed, and a week before people were supposed to sign these things, they fall apart. Um, and so it really feels volatile. And I don't recommend it unless you really know you can do it, and you should go out there and do it. But yeah, I've just felt the pain from the outside, and it feels really hard.
Have you read any of John Morillow's books, Built to Sell, The Art of Selling Business, The Automatic Customer, and his podcast is awesome. Have you listened to any of that?
I think Built to Sell is on my list. I haven't read it yet.
Yeah, we've had John
That's a
on.
good one to read.
It's great. I'll
Nice.
send you through a link. We've had John on our Quickfire Friday and our main cast back in April this year. And yeah, I've listened to 3 or 4 episodes a week. I think you get a lot of value out of listening to those. I'll shoot you through a link through to all those. But the books are great. The 3 books he's written as well: The Automatic Customer, recurring revenue, not just SaaS businesses, but most businesses can find ways to build recurring revenue, which is much more valuable than normal revenue. All right, Nima, we're on to our final 5 questions. What do you think is the hardest thing in growing a small business?
Probably getting customers and keeping the revenue.
Favorite business book which has helped you the most?
Probably High Output Management by Andy Grove.
Yep.
Still kicks.
Yeah. What he wrote that in the 80s?
I think 70s, yeah.
70s,
A long
yeah.
time ago.
Yeah, I think I'm halfway through that. I had to put it down. It's a little bit difficult to read. I think I could because I couldn't get the audiobook. That's the problem. Yeah.
Yeah, he's not a great writer, but there is another version. There's a new one I'm reading. I've read a couple of times now, called "The Making of a Manager" by Julie Zhao, I think. And I'm calling it, when people ask me how it is, I say that, I tell them that if like high output management was written in the 2010s, this is what it would look like. And it's from a wonderful woman who was the VP design at Facebook for a decade or so. It's really well written, and a lot of the concepts are repeated.
Any great podcasts or online learning tools you use for your own professional development?
I probably am listening to like the Bartlett Show. I'm listening to all in a bunch, just because these are like techies and I'm in the tech industry. A lot of our clients are in the same space. But otherwise, everything I listen to are either books or podcasts with people that expand my mind. So I'm a big fan of like folks like Sam Harris or Lex Friedman. I listen to their stuff, especially when they're bringing on like entrepreneurs or scientists. They tend to sort of like think in ways that excite my mind, and so I spend a lot of my time on those types of things.
One tool you'd recommend to help grow a small business?
I mean, I gotta say right now, it's like, ChatGPT tends to be really good, or any of these AI tools. Just consume the whole internet, and so if you ask the right questions, you get really good insights. A lot of our press releases are now written by AI, for instance. And so I think like a lot of copywriting and things that you were doing before that were in the bottom 50th percentile of importance to your business, you want to not be doing anymore, and using AI for.
Yep.
So you can have more time to sell, to find new customers, to grow.
Finally, my favorite question: what would you tell yourself on day one of starting out?
Yeah, I think it's focusing on rhythm earlier, just building some form of a ritual for myself on being introspective. I wish I'd done that earlier. I wish I'd been better at it by now. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Nima. I've really enjoyed our chat, and congratulations to you and the team and your co-founders going from 3 to 35 team members over the last 5 years. Phenomenal growth. So congratulations.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And for our audience, we would greatly appreciate a review in iTunes or whatever platform you listen to us on. More reviews means we bubble up higher in iTunes, etc. So more business owners looking for podcast help with their growth will find us.